Well, good morning, everybody. So the general consensus around the room is, as I visited with a few of you this morning and we were chatting about where we find ourselves as a field, is we should be almost giddy with excitement about where we find ourselves today in this field. I mean, it's unbelievable, isn't it? There has literally never been a better time in the history of the world to be doing what we're doing. It's almost incredible. And yet, as I have conversations with folks and people are sharing their excitement and their plans for the future, and yet I also hear this undercurrent of we somehow aren't quite getting it right. The world is shifting, and how are we going to shift and remain vibrant, vital, and relevant as we go forward? You know, we've talked a lot about the aging demographics and the age wave that's coming, and people keep talking about, well, you know, the age wave is coming. The age wave is not coming. The age wave is here. It's here to stay, and it's been here, and it's going to be here for the next 40 years. This is the biggest wave the world has ever seen. This is the equivalent of the Ice Age. I mean, it really is. We've added more years in the last 150 years to the lifespan than have been added in all of prior time. All of prior time. Think about the fundamental shift that is going to mean for our world in how we age. So we know that there are more people who are growing old every day. We've added the 25 years, and we're changing how we age. Anyone know who this guy is? He died a couple of years ago at the age of 106. He's pictured here at the age of 103. He's running a marathon. Not a 5K, not a 10K, not a half marathon. He's running the full 26.1 miles marathon at 103. Now, he's not running terribly fast. This is what he looked like when he started the race. But I think you get an idea that how we age has fundamentally shifted. And not only has it fundamentally shifted, but I often hear from people as I talk about the aging demographic, well, you know, those folks have no money. And I'm thinking, what newspaper do you read? They have 70% of the wealth of our country. They have 2 times the discretionary spending of the next demographic. This is where the money's at. This is where the people are at. So it's really the golden time in our field. And then you look at if you are a for-profit provider. By the way, how many here are not-for-profit providers or representing not-for-profits? How many here are representing for-profits? And this is why I love this conference. Right? This is one of the few places where we bring people together to share and to talk. So you might look at this slide as the for-profit, and I'm sorry if it depresses you, but it's going to get better for you. This is the share of the continuing care market split between the for-profits and the not-for-profits. Independent living, very different story. You should start feeling better about yourselves if you're a for-profit. Assisted living, not quite as good, but still really good. You're getting 75% of the marketplace. Memory care, same thing. So you're dominating the new models of care. But it's not all good news, right? It's not all good news. There's a lot of scary stuff out there. And part of it is that people don't like us. 90% of the people out there say they're never going to live in a retirement community. 80% say they're going to die in their home, yeah, or under their home even. 90% of the people reject us because this is their view of what a retirement community is. We really are a little bit like Preparation H, right? Bad if you need us, good to have us. And we laugh. But let me tell you, that's how we're perceived. That really is how we're perceived. How many can remember the last time somebody was enthused and eager to move into one of our communities? They said, I cannot wait till I'm old enough to live in one of your communities. It doesn't really happen. So we have an enormous amount of challenge out there, and it shows in the market share. This is the world of people who could live in one of our communities. The big red circle, which ought to be, you would think, the circle we're capturing, those are the 90% who won't ever look at us. The 10% who do look at us, 70% of those reject us. right? We're getting 3% of the marketplace, and it's actually shrinking. And that's the alarm bell that ought to go out. That's why this conference on disruption and innovation is so important, because what the marketplace is telling us is, you don't have what I want. 3% market penetration. We're in a time of real flux as a field, and flux is a really scary place to be. You can be excited by it, you can be terrified by it. Most people are terrified by it, and when we think about industries that have faced disruption, there are more examples of organizations that can't make the turn than those that do. For every Netflix, there's a Blockbuster. How did they fail? How did they lose their market share? Sears, the biggest retailer, disrupted by Amazon. And people look at Amazon today and say, oh, Amazon came in with just a business model and they disrupted Sears. They came in with a business model and they continually innovated and adapted and changed and moved that model until they hit their marketplace. And they're still evolving and changing. The Rolling Dead, the taxi companies, right? Who's taken a taxi? I haven't taken a taxi in 3 years probably. Why would you? Totally disrupted. Taxis are now irrelevant and out of business. We're carriage manufacturers in many respects. How many buggy makers made the turn to the automobile industry? 0. They just couldn't do it. And part of the reason is they couldn't put their hands into a moving engine and adapt. A CEO of a failed industry that I'll talk about in a second was interviewed, and he was asked, how did you miss it? How did you miss the disruptive technology, and how did you miss the turn? And he said, you know, because the old technology, the buggy was producing income, and I couldn't put my hands into a moving engine and change the fan belt. And so they rode the business to the bitter end, and now they're out of business. So what do we need to do? We need to do 3 things, and the first thing we need to do is we need to understand what business we're in. So if I were to ask you a question, if I were to say, I want you to take a note card and write down for me the answer to the question, what business is X in? And put in the name of your company. And think about how you would respond to that question. That may seem like a throwaway question to you. That may seem like a simplistic question, but let me tell you, it's a simplistic question with really profound implications. Let me tell you the story of 2 companies who answered that question very differently, faced disruption, and had very different results. Ever heard of these 2 companies? IBM, what were they famous for 25 years ago? Mainframes, right? I mean, that's where they got 90% of their revenue. What was the disruptive technology IBM faced? The PC, right? So they looked at this, and they looked at the first PC, and by the way, the first PCs were not what we have now. So you got to remember that. I mean, I remember my dad coming home with, I think it was an Osborne or something. And this was a PC that was portable. You remember, how many people remember like the Osborne? Yeah, it came in a suitcase. It weighed about 60 pounds, and you dragged it around and opened it up, and then you could play Pong because that was about the only thing you could do with this thing. But that was the first PC. So a lot of people looked at that disruptive technology and said, yeah, this is going nowhere. People aren't going to have these in their house. You know, every home's not going to have a PC. That's ridiculous. How many have an Apple smartwatch? How many have a smartphone? How many have PCs in their home, office, and car? It's unbelievable. So IBM looked at that, and they answered the question of what business we're in, not by saying we're in the mainframe business. They say we're in the problem-solving business. We help businesses solve problems. And today we're doing that through the mainframe, but you know what? Tomorrow we're going to have to do it in a different way. And because of how they answered that simple question of what business are we in, they were able to adapt and innovate and make the turn successfully. Ginny Rometty, who's their CEO, commented once that IBM is going to have to reinvent itself every 5 to 7 years. Fundamentally shift its business every 5 to 7 years. Think of how big they are and what a statement that is, that she's saying we're going to have to shift and be that nimble as that size organization, because that's the place we find ourselves today with respect to disruption and technology. Kodak, what business were they in? Film, right? You couldn't go anywhere on the earth and not find, literally, not anywhere on the earth and not find Kodak film. They cornered the market. They were known around the world, and they were an enormous profit engine. What was the disruptive technology for them? Digital, absolutely. What's so fascinating about that? They owned the technology. They had all the patents. They owned it all. And they answered the question of what business we're in by saying, oh, we're in the film business. It's a great business until it wasn't. And today they're auctioning off their patents, and a once great, storied, American, iconic company is largely gone. It's astonishing to think about. So the question of what business you're in, if you define it as we're in the CCRC business, we're in the AL memory care, we're in the skilled care business. If you define your channel, you're facing a fundamental risk that is often fatal, and it's not going to be realized until it's too late. If you answer the question of we're in the service of helping people age well, and today we do that in this channel, but you know what, tomorrow it might be something different, you're not guaranteed success, but you're guaranteed a shot. Second thing we need to do is understand what our customer wants. And you know what? We think we're expert at that. We think we're really good at that today. We're not. And you know why I say that? And I love this field. We're not because the numbers tell us we're not. People are rejecting us. They come to us out of desperation, not out of desire. How well do we understand our customer? Does everybody know what this product is? Oil of Olay. Everybody's grandma had a bottle of oil of Olay in the bathroom. So Procter & Gamble, the company that owned this brand, was facing a challenge. And they had a brand that was outdated, that was viewed as negative by the consumer, out of date, and they weren't sure what to do with it. It was grandma's skin cream, and P&G wasn't sure to do with it. Their sales were declining, the market was going away, and they were faced with three fundamental choices. They either had to remake this brand, or throw it out and buy a brand and build a new brand off an acquisition, or throw it out and just start from scratch. Just build something new. Don't try to build off the dying remnants of grandma's brand. And Procter & Gamble chose what I would have thought would have been the hardest choice. They decided to remake Oil of Olay into Olay to help us all fight the 7 signs of aging. Now you're probably thinking, I didn't know there were 7 signs of aging. There aren't. They make this stuff up. You know, they just make this up out of whole cloth. And you think about our business, we actually are changing and improving people's lives. They're fighting 7 signs of aging. Now, how many of you are going to go back and look up what the 7 signs of aging are? And then you'll be terrified and you'll become an Olay customer. They turned it into a multi-billion-dollar business, but they understood their customer. And this is something I think we often don't do. If you read the book Playing to Win, it tells the story of Procter & Gamble's redevelopment of effectively this brand. And it's a fascinating read. And when I first went through the book and I was highlighting different areas, I kept highlighting this phrase, research. The customer research told us, we did a deep dive here, we did observational studies over here. This wasn't a Survey Monkey report. They did deep dive research into understanding who their customers were and what their customers worried about. And what did they find out? Well, they found out that there were 7 things that most people agreed on worried them about growing old and their appearance, hence the 7 signs of aging. And with that deep, genuine knowledge of their consumers, looking at how their consumers use their brand, they reinvented Oil of Olay into Olay and made it into a multi-billion-dollar product line for Procter & Gamble. Playing to Win, it's an interesting read, and it has some great lessons for where we find ourselves as an industry. Last thing we need is a plan, right? Leonard Bernstein was quoted as saying that, you know, creativity, what do you need for creativity? You need a plan and not quite enough time. And I think that's actually true, and so I'm going to leave us with the thought that I think what we really need to do is climb Everest. What do I mean by that? I attended a lecture a little over a year ago by a guy who climbed Mount Everest. How many people here have climbed Mount Everest, by the way? Yeah, that would be 0. And what's interesting about this guy, if I brought him on the stage and I did a lineup and put 5 people up here and said, pick out the guy who climbed Everest, you would never pick this guy. He was the most ordinary looking schmo you could find on the street. He's a lawyer, And he is the last guy. He is not some, ultra marathoner. He does not look like Mr. Fitness, and he's not. But he climbed Mount Everest, and he told the story, and it was fascinating. Right, it's a fascinating story because Everest, it turns out, is a really difficult thing to do. So you might not have known that, but it's true. And so the first thing you have to do, right, you have to hike up to base camp. And the reason you have to hike up to base camp and then sit for a few days is not because you're on vacation, it's because you have to acclimate because it's so miserable to be there. So you get all this stuff on, you get all your gear, you hand all of it to your Sherpa, and then you hike up a miserable little walk to base camp where you sit for 3 days and try not to die. And you think to yourself, okay, well, at least I got here. It's not going to get worse. The worst is over. Oh, no. The worst is just beginning. Because the next day you start crawling up this giant ice cube. And to get up to the next camp, you got to start wearing crampons. Crampons are these little steel spikes that you strap onto your shoes, right? So you can, climb up the mountain and not fall off. Because if you fall off, you're going to die. So you climb up to your second camp and you think, this is just awful, it's miserable, and but the worst is over, right? So now I've got that behind me and it's all smooth sailing. No, it gets worse, right? Because now, not only are you wearing crampons and you're going up the ice cube, but we throw in a few crevasses. And a crevasse is basically a big canyon in the mountain where I've got to get from here to there, but there's a 300-foot hole in between. And so how do you get over that? Well, you got these guys who tie together a bunch of ladders with string, and they throw them over the crevasse, and then you sit there with your crampons, and you go across them, right? And you're bouncing around, and there's 300 feet below you. So if your crampon gets stuck, if you lose your balance, if you get distracted, you fall off and die. And you just sit there. They don't even try to get you out. You just sit down there. So, you get about halfway across one of these crevasses, and you're really hoping that the guy who tied these ladders together, made it to Eagle Scout. And you finally get to the other side, and you think, glad I'm here, the worst is over. It's not over. It gets worse because now you get to the next camp, and they throw in one last obstacle for you. There's no air. Now, it would occur to me that this might be the tiniest indication that we're not meant to be there. So now what you're doing is you're not only wearing your crampons, you're crawling across ladders, but you're breathing oxygen as you go, right? So you think these, you're going across the ladder, and you're hoping that you don't hallucinate and just fall off. And finally, you get to your last camp. You wake up at 2 o'clock in the morning, and you start your final ascent. You get to the top if you're lucky. And most people actually don't make it because the weather's not good enough. You spend 15 minutes or less, and then you repeat the whole process going back down. It's crazy, right? And so you sit there and think, what kind of idiot does this? And so we ask the question, what kind of idiot does this? Why would you ever do this? He said, there was one reason I did it, and there's one great thing I learned from doing it. He said, I did it to prove that we can do the impossible. With enough planning and preparation and training and careful execution, we can do things that we think we can't otherwise do. And he said, the second thing I discovered is you can't do this alone. It truly takes a team to make this work. And I think that may be one of the best lessons for us. Number one, with enough planning and preparation and care and execution, we can get through the disruptive times we find ourselves in and realize fully on the opportunities that are in front of us. And the second thing we can do is do something that's foreign to most of us. We can partner. We can work together. We don't have to be all things to all people. And if there's one thing that the morning conversations made clear to me, it's that this group of people, and it's one of the reasons I'm so excited to be here, this group of people is the group who are looking for those partnerships and connections, looking for the innovations, looking to better understand the consumer and make sure that we can realize fully where we find ourselves today. It is a unique time in the world for us. We should be just giddy with excitement, and I hope and believe we are. Now we just need to figure out how to get it done.